The key sat in my palm like a small, stubborn truth. Mama watched me the way mothers watch a baby take her first steps, proud and terrified in equal measure. Daddy had gone into the ground on a Wednesday. On Friday, my mother put a ribboned box on the table and told me we had a door to open. "It's a store," she said, her voice as steady as thread pulled through canvas. Not his. Ours, a widow's store 3 streets over from the river. She sells flour that doesn't lie, sugar that doesn't shame, and coffee that tastes like men don't get to decide what the day becomes. I laughed. And it came out wild and cracked, like ice breaking up in the river. "We don't have money," I said. "We have enough to start," she replied, and then she laid her hand over mine. "And we have what money can't buy." "What's that?" asked, though I knew. "Memory," she said, "and a promise." We went to see the store that afternoon, a hand closing and opening around the key like it could warm itself into courage. The sign above the door read Finch's, though the widow's name was Millie, and the windows were cleaner than a prayer. Inside, everything was small but honest. Jars of dry beans lined up like little shoulders. Barrels of flour wearing open mouths. A row of tins that had learned their patience from the river's slow talk. Millie was 60 and had the look of a woman who had paid a toll and crossed anyway. She wore a gray dress with a stubborn hem and a kindness that didn't ask for change. "You, the girl with the camera?" she asked, as if the camera and I were one story. "Yes, ma'am," I said. "And the girl from the button factory?" "I need both," she said. "Spawn to see what's there and someone to count what can be made." She named a price that sounded like breath held. And Mama and I held ours until we understood we could make it. We offered less because dignity requires it. And then we stood in the middle of that little store and shook hands like people who were about to test the strength of their names. When Millie put the key in my palm, I wore the ribbon like a small blue river around my wrist, she said. "Every man in this town wants a ledger book that makes him God. You start yours with a pencil and an eraser. You write in it what's owed and also what's forgiven. You leave room on the right-hand side for grace." I nodded like I could bear the weight of such arithmetic. Hunger had taught me to count by halves. Sorrow had taught me to round up. That night, I slept with the key under my pillow the way children sleep with teeth. In my dream, the door swung open by itself. Opening, we opened a week later. We scrubbed the floor with vinegar that made the air taste like clean courage. We painted the sign, Finch and Daughters, because names need nourishing too. I washed the windows until I could see my own face and believe it. Mama arranged oranges in a pyramid that would have felt like show-off in another life, and I chalked an idea on the board outside. No ledgers. Fair credit. Trade welcome. Ask for bones. I thought of Mr. Hollis when I wrote the word ledgers. I tasted laundry starch and promises broken neat. His shadow hung near my shoulder like a moth watching a candle. I set my jaw the way Mama had taught me to when men tried to make the world smaller than it was. People came like the river rises slow, then all at once. Some came out of curiosity, some out of loyalty to the idea of us. And some because hunger makes converts the way love does. You see it coming, and then you can imagine the world without it. "Bones?" Sis Hampton asked on the first afternoon, leaning on the counter like she was leaning into an old conversation. "Here," I said, lifting the brown paper parcel like it could sing. "For stock and for the kind of broth that reminds a person their blood is honest." She pressed the coins into my palm. But I shoved 3 back and wrote beside her name on our paper, "Paid," and also, "Her kindness is larger than her debt." When I showed the book to Mama that night, she traced the words with one finger, the way a person might touch a child's cheek. "You're making a different kind of store," she said. "That's the revenge," I told her, soft as the inside of a biscuit. "We'll feed them until the ledger has nothing to say." The camera hung on a nail by the register, and a sign beside it read, "Pictures for pay or for proof." If a woman wanted to keep a copy of her face the day she chose herself, I took it. If a man needed a photograph to prove his hand had been chewed by a machine that didn't care about names, I made sure the light was merciless. At night, I counted. Beans, coins, blessings, breaths. The store was a living thing, its floorboard, heart thumped under my feet. Its glass eyelids closed and opened with morning and night. I slept in the back room with a cot and a window that watched the alley. And when I woke like a person who'd been called. Return the first letter came from Miss Edie in early spring. Her handwriting ran down the page like a woman late to church but determined to arrive with dignity. She wrote about sickness and its ordinary heroism, about boys growing into boots and girls into their hips. She wrote, too, about a sign in a window, 3 days walk south. Hollis and Sons, I could see the S he didn't deserve. The way men add a plural to make themselves bigger. Then the last line, written in a hand I recognized as a rush held in check. He's selling. It took 3 days of thinking that tasted like nickel and fear before I told Mama. He's selling the store, I said. The ledger, she asked. Everything, I said. And I could feel the store around me listening. Do you need to go? She asked. She didn't say, do we? She knew this was a woman in her hunger kind of trip. Yes, I said, and then my throat closed up like a fist. She nodded. Bring a match, she said. I packed a bag with clothes that could pass anywhere, the camera, a roll of bills wrapped in cloth, and the small knife my father had carried to peel apples thin enough to see through. I wrote a sign for the door closed for a death that was coming. Millie stood at the corner watching me lock up. Get what you came for, she said, as if I had said it first. On the train, the world unspooled like thread off a bobbin. Fields blurred into faces in the windows. Faces blurred into nights. I slept with my hand in my bag, palm on the camera, like a prayer. It was a Saturday. The sky had the sting of a just-shaved man. The store sat smaller than I remembered it, which is how grief renders things that once seemed large. The door was open. The windows were clean the way someone cleans a house before they leave it to strangers. A bell on the door made the same little hush sound it always had. Men stood around with their hands in their pockets like they were resting in church. I saw Mr. Hollis's mouth before I saw the rest of him, the way you see a weapon glitter before you locate the hand. He had grown older in the particular way of men whose power has less place to sit. He saw me and smiled like the past was a joke he had told very well. You're a long way from home, he said, and the word home meant both houses and the kind of body a girl has before men try to buy their way into it. I came for the ledger, I said. It comes with the building, he replied. Then I came for both, I said, and I moved through the room like it owed me space. The auction was quick and careful. A man with a nasally voice did his song. Hands went up and down like little flags surrendering to the wind. I held my breath until the numbers reached what I had and then stepped into the center like it was a dance and called a figure that made heads turn. You don't have that, Mr. Hollis said, but he said it to the room. I have more, I said, quiet and clean, than what's written there. They let me see the ledger. It lay on the counter like a sleeping animal you didn't want to wake. The leather was cracked, the corners softened by hands, and, I believed, by the shame of being a liar. I opened it and read the names the way you read your own history. Mama, Daddy, Mrs. Hampton. Men who had died. Women who had paid twice, once in money, once in pride. Sold, the nasally man said, and he pointed at me like I was a weather change. I counted money into his hands, then papers into mine. I looked at Mr. Hollis over the ledger, and he looked back with the kind of smile a man wears when he knows the past can be returned for store credit. Do what you like, he said, shrugging with his eyebrows. It's just a book. Then I'll just use it as kindling. I said. People laughed the way people do when they read, trying to make the moment lighter than it is. I carried the book out into the yard. There was an old metal barrel by the back steps where they burned boxes and the evidence of old seasons. I set the ledger on the lip and looked at the sky so God would have to watch. Mr. Hollis came to the doorway, the sun making a silhouette of his pious mouth. Mrs. Hampton stood beside me, her hands folded like she was about to say grace. Do you need matches? A boy asked. No, I said. I brought 2. I struck the first. It flared and told me a story about beginnings. I touched the flame to the corner of the book. It thought about it and then changed its mind. The second match took like a yes, you don't have to ask twice. The ledger curled like a leaf in a drought, and then it went up with a sound that made me think of a man breathing in to apologize and exhaling smoke. We watched paper turn to lace, then to ash. Names lifted and became uncatchable. I put my hand near the heat and felt a line inside me drawn a long time ago on a summer day when I was 12 and my mother. Took back our groceries just gently erased itself. Mr. Hollis turned and went back inside. When he came out again, he was carrying a box. "For you," he said, and there was something like surrender in the way he said it. Something like a man tired of holding a rope. He set the box at my feet and walked away without looking back. He didn't say goodbye. He didn't have to. Goodbye had already been said. I opened the box. Inside were 4 scales weights, a pencil stub, a receipt book, and a cherry red ribbon the exact color of the one my mother had tied in my hair when she took me to the store to count bones. I don't know if he meant it as apology, insult, or nothing at all. I tied the ribbon around my wrist. Home again, Finch and Daughters smelled different when I came back. Things do after fires. I put the ribbon in the drawer with the knife, and the night I turned the key, the bell rang like a friend who could keep her mouth shut. "Did you bring it?" Mama asked. "Ah." "I burned it," I said. She nodded and put her hand over her heart. We didn't talk about it again. Not the fire, not the box, not the way the sky had looked like it had swallowed a blackbird's flock. We had beans to count. The work was its own religion. We broke it into saints: Saint Sweep, Saint Mop, Saint Dust, Saint Count, Saint Smile, Saint Tell the Truth. On Sundays, when the river wore its good blue, I took pictures of families outside the store with their arms around each other like fences built to keep the wind off. I hung the photographs inside above the flower, and people would come in for salt and see themselves looking out at themselves and stand a little taller. Agnes married a boy from the mill with the kind of shoulders that promised labor, and the kind of eyes that promised anyone who saw them they'd be held careful. They named their first baby Mercy because they could. I held her and cried into her hair like I was smelling home. There was a strike at the button factory that summer, and my camera became a weapon I wasn't ashamed to carry. Men with signs, women with babies on their hips, foremen with faces like cement. The newspaper printed my pictures and misspelled my name, and I was too proud to care. After, the factory posted a note promising to measure men by their work and not by their wives' silence. It was half the truth and a quarter of the promise we needed, but it was a start, and starts have to be celebrated so the heart remembers what it's for. The boy with the slow hands. His name was Eli. He came in for coffee and left with my afternoon. He had slow hands and quick eyes, the combination that makes a woman think, here is someone who will take his time learning me and then never stop. He talked like a creaks, steady, bright, with stones you stutter over on purpose just to hear their names. He was a carpenter, son who had learned to measure twice and cut once, and to his credit to apologize if the cut was crooked. He asked if he could carry the flour barrel to the back. I said no because I was strong, and then I said yes because he didn't flinch when I said no. We played that game for 3 weeks until he asked me if I'd share a peach on the stoop, and I said, "I've been hungry my whole life." "What kind of hunger do you mean?" "The kind that ends in a kitchen," he said. "The kind with teaspoons, and someone saying, 'Taste this.'" We married in the heat and sweated through our vows, which felt right for people who had never been wasted on cool. He had the gift of building and the curse of wanting to make every corner perfect. I had the gift of knowing where to let the light in. We bought the bakery downstairs when the baker's wife grew tired of Dawn, and we let a boy named Nathan run it who had flour in his fingernails and a tendency to whistle off-key while kneading dough. The store, the bakery, the camera hour, little block learned our names the way a river learns every rock by touch. We had a daughter. We named her Leela because it sounded like a shade the sky might wear when she was in a good mood. When she cried, it was like a bird stuck behind a window. When she laughed, it was the same. I fed her biscuits with my fingers, soft inside, careful crust. When she was 5, she asked me, "What's hunger?" And I lied and said, a thing that happens to other people when the world forgets them. And then I spent the next 20 years teaching her the truth in the only way I could, by making the world remember. Counting Mercy, the pantry started as a shelf in the back and a stubborn idea. No child in this neighborhood will be shy with hunger. We called it Mercy after the baby who grew, named by Annis's hope. People who had extra brought extra. People who had less brought what they could time, recipes, the memory of being helped, and the desire to make someone else stand taller. We made rules and broke them when we had to. Rule 1. No questions asked. Rule 2. Everyone takes the same pride out as they bring in. I taught a boy named Samuel to write his name by making an S in spilled rice, and then asking him to find it with his finger the way he would find a doorknob in the dark. He looked at me and said, "You're nice," and I felt like I'd stolen something I didn't deserve. Once a week, I cooked beans so long they learned a new language. We served bowls out back where the alley made a little elbow of shade. Men and women and the kind of kids who learned early to say please lined up. Eli stood with a ladle and said, "Taste this," and then said it again, softer, and the world made a different shape. I kept the ledger Millie had told me to keep. On the left, what came in? Beans, flour, eggs, hours. On the right, what went out? Stew, bread, mercy. At the bottom of each page, I wrote a sentence I had learned to live by, paid in full by those who will never know our names. It was the only math that made sense. War. War is the most expensive lie men tell. It came to our street in a telegram, and in the long look, a woman gives a suitcase when she is packing it for someone else. Eli went because he said his father would have expected him to. There you go. And because he had the kind of heart that believed in holding up the parts of the sky that sagged. I sent him with biscuits wrapped in wax paper and a photograph of Lila with her head thrown back, mouth open in a joy that felt like a dare. He wrote letters that smelled like mud and smoke and sometimes nothing at all. He said the light was different there, flatter, less honest. He said he had learned to sleep with his boots on. He asked about beans in the bakery and the boy with the whistle. I answered with small news because small news is what keeps a man's mind from breaking. He came home with a limp you didn't see until he tried to run. He came home with hands that couldn't stand still. He came home with his eyes a little farther back in his head, as if they had retreated to a place where they could look without weeping. He stood in the store and pressed his palm flat to the counter like he was trying to remember what would felt like when it wasn't TA crate for carrying someone S-boy. We made new rules. Rule 1. No loud noises after dark. Rule 2. Don't ask about the limp unless you read the one who has to live with it. Rule 3. Stand close when you can. He healed in the way men do with pride and with protest and then with gratitude that tasted like surrender. We had a second child, a boy we named Thomas because we wanted a doubter in the house. Someone who would ask, "Show me," when the world tried to sell him magic beans. He had my mouth and Eli's quiet. He loved the pantry because it made sense, and he loved the camera because it told the truth even when you looked away. The knife and the fold families break the way sheets do along the crease you press into them yourself. Lila grew up beautiful in the particular way that frightens mothers and encourages men. She had my stubborn jaw and none of my patience for other people's stories. She wanted a city that didn't know her name so she could decide it for herself every morning. We let her go because holding a girl too tight turns her into fog. She married a man whose shirts cost more than a week's groceries, and who talked about money like it was a god that could be pleased if you made the right sacrifices. She wore shoes that made the sound of a woman stepping round herself. When she brought him home, he shook Eli's hand like he was buying a horse. He walked through the store and looked at the pantry with a smile that meant he could improve anything by turning it into a number. At dinner, he said the word investment so many times it lost its clothes. After they left, Eli and I sat on the steps and listened to the river argue with the barrels in the alley. "You hate him," Eli said without asking. "I hate what he thinks the world is," I said. "And I'm afraid he will teach her to think it too." We were right. which is one of the saddest things a parent can be. 6 months later, a man came with papers. He wore a tie that looked like it had strangled nicer people. He told me Lila and her husband had borrowed against the building because they had a chance to buy a bigger chance, and chances don't wait. He said if we couldn't pay, the store would belong to the kind of bank that uses the word community and means inventory. I sat down because I had learned to sit when the weather inside me turned fast. I looked at the man, I looked at the paper. I thought about the key under my pillow, and the ledger turned ash, and the way my mother's hand had felt when she taught me to cut butter into flour. How much? I asked. He named a number that tasted like iron. We'll pay, I said. We can set up a ledger, he began, and I laughed. No, I said. We burn those here. He didn't understand, which was fine. He didn't need to. He left with his tie still smug, and I sat at the table and did the math I had been doing my whole life. We would have to close the pantry for a while. We would have to sell the bakery to Nathan outright. We would have to ask Agnes for the kind of help that doesn't come with interest. We would have to ask Eli to build things he didn't want to build, and Thomas to carry loads that weren't his size yet. That night, I opened the camera and held the lens up to the light. I pressed my mouth to the glass and whispered a prayer to the God of seeing. Debt and mercy. People came when they heard. They came with their old wealth time recipes. The ability to stand beside you without telling you what to do. Agnes put her hand on my shoulder and said, I remember the peppermint, and I knew she meant all of it. Mrs. Hampton, older hands, now the color of parchment. Pressed $2 into my palm and said, add bones, and we laughed like we couldn't help it. We made a schedule. 3 months of harder beans, 6 of less sugar, a year of no new dresses. Eli took jobs that made his limp worse. Thomas got a second shift delivering papers and learned how to fold the truth into perfect rectangles. I took photographs of weddings and funerals and the quiet proof of a girl deciding she belonged to herself. I charged what I could, and I didn't when I couldn't. We paid. Every week I set coins on the table and listened to the music of their small courage. I wrote in the ledger on the right-hand side, paid in soup, paid in bread. Paid in the wild fact that a woman can stand inside her own name and refuse to move. Lila called once a month. Her voice had changed. Ted learned not to ask. She sent presents for the children that cost too much and fit too poorly. When she came to the store, she stood at the door as if there were a river between her and the flour. You should sell, she said. We are not a thing, I said, and my voice reached across to her and broke against something I couldn't see. She left angry. Anger is easier than shame. We held on. The number to the bank got smaller, and the number of days we woke with our hearts like birds in the ribcage got bigger. Eli's hair went white at the temples the way a field goes pale when frost comes. Thomas grew into a man and kept some of his boy, which is the best you can hope for. The pantry reopened on a Thursday with stew the color of forgiveness. A second fire finds you, even when you think you've paid your bill. It was a Sunday night and the bakery smelled like the exact hour before dawn. Nathan had left the ovens cooling and the door ajar because summer makes fools of all of us. A spark, a curtain, a memory of wind. The alley glowed like an accusation. We woke to shouting. I ran barefoot down the stairs with a bucket in my hand like that was how you save a life. Eli limped behind me, his breath counting the steps. Thomas was already there, the muscles in his jaw working like a man with a lock he can find the key for. The neighbors formed a line buckets, bowls, pots, hope. The smoke climbed the brick like a hungry animal. The flame found the roof like a long-lost friend. Get back, someone yelled, and the air folded in on itself with a sound like a page tearing in a large book. For a moment, that is, as long as a prayer and as short as a blink, I thought we would lose everything to the thing that had once saved me. Then the firemen arrived with their serious faces and their hoses that spoke a language louder than the flame. Water met fire. Steam rose like a ghost with good news. When it was over, the bakery was black at the edges, the air filled with the sweetness of sugar that had learned to burn. The store was wet and smoky, but standing. The camera sat on the counter, the glass unbroken, the lens watching. I touched it the way you touch a child after a fever, Nathan cried, his hands open like he could catch the pieces. I put my arms around him and said, "We can rebuild. We have rebuilt before. We will again." He nodded, then shook his head, then nodded, which is the only honest way to do it. People came with hammers and wood and the kind of sweat that means love. Eli measured and cut and measured again. Thomas hammered with a rhythm that told the fire it had misjudged us. Lila came with clean clothes and left with soot on her face and something like apology in her eyes. She didn't speak it. We didn't ask. We opened again on a Monday. The bread was smaller, the crusts thinner, the coffee more bitter. We named the first loaf back again and sold it for half price, because humor is sometimes the only thing that makes the math bearable. The last ledger. Mama got sick the way winters get serious. Started in her hands fingers that had been precise their whole lives, now forgetting which thread was which. Then her breath became a tight little box. Then her eyes, which had always seen right through lies and compliments, went cloudy like glass from 100 washings. "Don't do that," she said, when I tried to help her stand. "Let me be the last person I can be." I stepped back and watched her stand like a tree that has decided to wait out the storm. We sat at the table and talked the way we always had, which is to say, we talked about recipes when we meant God and about the weather when we meant love. She asked me to show her the ledger. I brought it, and she ran her hand down the right-hand column like it was a river she had crossed 1,000 times, which in a way it was. "You did it," she said. "What?" I asked. "You paid me back," she said, "and you paid you. And you paid the girl you were, the one with the biscuit in her pocket. And you paid the woman who took her hand that day and walked into the store and said, 'Count it again.'" I cried into the crook of my arm like a child, and she patted my head the way she had when I was small enough to fit under her shadow. "You set the ledger on fire," she whispered. "We did," I said. She died with the window open and the world coming in like it had been waiting at the door for its moment to be let in. We buried her with a ribbon tied around her wrist like a promise she could take with her. I put a match in her pocket and smiled, and the pastor didn't ask why. After, I took the ledger to the river. I didn't burn it. I read it out loud, names, numbers, mercies, lies turned true by the way we lived anyway. Hannah, my granddaughter, who you already know is quick and soft and city-fast, stood beside me with the recorder blinking its little red eye. I handed her the book. "What do I do with it?" she asked. "Carry it," I said. "Not like a weight. Like a map, Hannah. Just talk like you're talking to me," she'd said the night she brought the recorder. And I did, and the story bit, and we sat with its teeth in us and ate anyway. She asked good questions. "What did revenge taste like?" she asked once, while the tea made its dull little huffs of steam. "Like clean water," I said. "I lie unwound. Like bone broth after a long sickness." "Did you forgive him?" she asked another time, and I knew she meant Mr. Hollis. "I did," I said, "but only after I built a place where forgiveness made sense." "Did you forgive Mama?" she asked, meaning Leela, and her voice had the wobble of a branch that doesn't know if it can hold weight. "Every day," I said. "And sometimes I forgot, and then I forgave myself for forgetting." Hannah came to the store after school, and I taught her to cut butter into flour with 2 knives, just like my mother had taught me. She has the fingers for it. She has the eyes for seeing when the dough has become something more than dry. I showed her how to hold the camera and ask a person to look at themselves without flinching. I put her name in the ledger on the right-hand side and wrote, "Paid in curiosity." She asked about the pantry, and I said, "It's yours if you want it." She said, "I do," with a seriousness that made me step back and let her in. She put new rules on the wall. Rule 1, if you take something, teach something. Rule 2, if you bring something, sit a while. Rule 3, if you are ashamed, let us hold it for you until it's smaller. People read the rules and nodded like their necks had needed that motion. She asked about hunger. I told her the truth. "It is a teacher," I said, "but it is not a god, and you don't have to worship it." She wrote that on a card and stuck it. behind the sugar bins where only the person who needed to see it would. The visit. Mr. Hollis came to the store once after we burned his book. He was older and smaller, and he wore a hat like a shield. He stood by the door the way you stand in a house you dream about after you no longer have the right to own it. "I heard you opened a pantry," he said. "We did," I said. "We leave the door open as long as the weather allows. You'll be taken advantage of," he said, and it was almost tender the way he said it, like he was offering me a piece of his old protective world. "I hope so," I said. "I hope people take and take until they believe they deserve. Then I hope they give because they can't stand not to." He looked like he wanted to argue, and then he didn't. He took off his hat. The gesture made him look like a boy I might have liked. "I was wrong," he said. I nodded. "So was I." I replied. "At what?" He asked, squinting like the answer was in the back room. "At thinking revenge was fire," I said. "It was, and then it wasn't. Mostly, it was a door." He left without buying anything. On the stoop, he turned and looked at the chalkboard. Hannah had written on it that morning, "Come in if you're tired, leave tired too, but less." He smiled and kept walking. The last lesson: I am old now. The bones that were once currency for broth are now the broth itself, simmering slow. My hands remember everything I taught them and some of the things I forgot. The store hums with a history that feels like breath. The pantry runs whether I am there or not, which is the finest measure of a good idea. Hannah brings the recorder and the questions, and I bring the biscuits and the answers I can bear to tell. "Tell me a story that changes," she says, "the way Agnes used to," and I do. And we sit in the kitchen, and the porch light hums, and the moths test themselves against it, and we let them. This is the lesson I will have you write on the right-hand side. Hunger is not empty. It is not ignorance. It's not shame. It is a full, loud, sharp thing that teaches you to count and to cook and to love what feeds you. But you are not required to keep learning it forever. Graduations happen in kitchens. Diplomas are biscuits. Teachers are mothers and widows and girls who demand bones from men who count differently. When I die, which I will, and which I am trying to prepare you for without turning your heart into a ledger of fears, I want the store to pass to the person who can. Keep 2 columns at once: dollars and dignity. I want the pantry to have a bell that rings when someone leaves, not when they come in, so we can say, "Go in peace," and mean it. I want the camera to hang on its nail until a hand yours, or someone like you, takes it down and points it at a face that has never been asked to be seen and asks it, gently, to be seen. I want one more thing. I want you to take the ribbon from the drawer, the red one. The color of matches, the color of courage, and tie it around your wrist. I want you to go to the river with the ledger and read the names and the mercies. And when you are done, I want you to close the book and put it in your bag. Do not burn it. Carry it, not like a weight, but like a map. You will need both sides. The left will teach you what to count. The right will teach you how. I learned hunger before I learned school. It made me sharp, and it made me mean sometimes, and it made me generous often, and it taught me to listen when flour talks, and when girls say no, and when men say yes for you, and you say don't. It taught me to see that revenge can be a store with a door that does not lock against women with coins made of breath, and that forgiveness can be a pantry where the ladle says, "Taste this." And you do, and you remember what your own name tastes like on your tongue. Tonight I will press the red eye and tell you the last thing. Love is not a ledger, it is a kitchen. Bring bones, bring water, bring your hunger. We will make a broth that remembers everyone who taught us to stir. Then we will eat, and we will leave tired too, but less, and there will be enough left to carry to a neighbor. And they will add pepper and a story and bring the bowl back empty and full at once. That is the arithmetic I leave you. That is the door. Open it.